The thing about being the newest species admitted to the Galactic Council is that everyone treats you like the intern who accidentally got hired as CEO. Sure, humans had mastered faster-than-light travel, developed revolutionary quantum computing, and figured out how to make dairy-free ice cream that actually tastes good. But according to the Council, we still couldn't be trusted to do anything more complex than organize the office party. That's where I come in. My name is Jack Porter, and I'm what the Council politely calls Earth's Cultural Integration Specialist. In reality, I'm the guy they send in when they need a human who can smile and nod while being talked down to by beings who think they invented electricity just because their species naturally evolved to shoot lightning from their appendages. The council chamber lived up to its name, a massive spherical room with floating platforms arranged in concentric circles, each holding representatives from different spacefaring civilizations. The whole setup screamed we're more advanced than you in the most passive-aggressive way possible. My platform, naturally, was stationed at the very bottom, right next to the maintenance hatch. Ambassador Crix, a tall crystalline being who looked like what would happen if a chandelier mated with a praying mantis, peered down at me from 3 levels up. Their faceted heads sparkled with what I'd learned to recognize as barely contained condescension. "Cultural Integration Specialist Porter," they chimed, their voice creating literal harmonics in the air. "The Council has decided to grant Earth a unique opportunity to demonstrate its maturity." I maintained my diplomatic smile, the one that said, "I'm totally not imagining you as a disco ball right now." "That's wonderful news, Ambassador. We're always eager to prove ourselves." Cultural Officer Nipa, an enthusiastic blob of purple goo with multiple eye stalks, bubbled excitedly from their containment sphere. "Oh yes, we're giving Earth the honor of hosting this year's intergalactic cultural exchange." Now, in human terms, that's like being asked to host the Olympics, the World Cup, and every major religious holiday simultaneously, while also making sure nobody accidentally starts an interstellar war because they used the wrong fork at dinner. That's unexpected, I managed while mentally calculating how many antacids I'd need to survive this assignment. May I ask why Earth was chosen? Crix's crystalline structure refracted light in what passed for their species equivalent of a smirk. "The Council believes that organizing a simple social gathering will be within humanity's limited capabilities." And the way they said limited capabilities made it sound like they were talking about a particularly dim houseplant. I've met houseplants with more respect for humanity than some council members. "Of course," I replied, channeling my inner kindergarten teacher patience. "We'd be honored to host such a prestigious event. I assume there are guidelines?" Nipa's eye stalks wiggled with excitement. "Oh yes, 17,423 pages of them. I've been studying human culture extensively, and I've already prepared several volumes of additional suggestions specifically tailored to Earth's unique situation." I could feel a headache forming. "Unique situation? Your species' charming tendency toward chaos," Crix explained, their crystal segments clicking in what I'd learned was their version of a condescending chuckle. "For instance, we've noticed that humans have an alarming habit of asking what's the worst that could happen, right before causing major diplomatic incidents." "That only happened twice," I protested. "And the second time doesn't count because technically, according to subsection 7b of the Treaty of Proxima Centauri, teaching the Zygons about practical jokes was a cultural exchange initiative. The Zygon Empress is still demanding reparations for the whoopee cushion incident," Crix reminded me sternly. "In our defense," I said, "nobody told us their species communicates through controlled flatulence." Nipa's containment sphere bobbed enthusiastically. "That's exactly why we've prepared such comprehensive guidelines. For instance, Section 453 covers proper airlock protocol for species that exist in gaseous form, including specific regulations about which way they should spiral when entering a room." I nodded, already knowing I'd need to assemble a team of Earth's finest overthinkers and chaos agents. Not because I wanted to cause trouble, but because sometimes the only way to handle overwhelming bureaucracy is to follow the rules so perfectly that they break themselves. "And when would you like this event to take place?" I asked, dreading the answer. Oh, the standard planning period for an event of this magnitude is typically 15 solar cycles, Crick said, their crystalline structure gleaming. However, given Earth's need to prove itself, we've scheduled it for next month. Of course they had, because nothing says we're setting you up to fail, quite like giving someone a deadline that would make a Time Lord sweat. Next month, I repeated, maintaining my diplomatic smile while mentally composing my resignation letter. How thoughtful of you to give us so much time to prepare. We thought so, Crix agreed, completely missing the sarcasm. Remember, Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, the Council will be watching Earth's performance very closely. This is your chance to prove that humans can follow simple instructions without turning them into an interstellar incident. As I left the chamber that day, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the Council had finally outsmarted themselves. After all, they'd just given a human explicit instructions to be as boring and predictable as possible, and if there's one thing humans excel at, it's malicious compliance. The thing about being given an impossible task by aliens is that you need an impossible team to handle it. Fortunately, I knew exactly where to find one. The United Earth Embassy's basement cafeteria wasn't just where dreams went to die. It was where they got jobs as bureaucrats. Among the fluorescent lights and questionably immortal vending machine sandwiches, I found my first recruit, Jenny Torres, Earth's premier logistics expert and the only person I knew who could make a spreadsheet feel threatened. "Let me get this straight," Jenny said, stabbing her synthetic meatloaf with unnecessary vigor. "They want us to organize the biggest diplomatic event in the galaxy, and they want it to be boring." "Not just boring," I corrected, sliding her the datapad containing the Council's requirements. "Predictable, safe, about as exciting as watching paint dry in zero gravity." Jenny's eyes lit up the way they always did when someone told her something was impossible. "They do realize they're asking humans to be predictable, right? The species that invented parkour because regular walking was too boring?" "That's what makes it interesting," I grinned. "They're so convinced we're going to mess this up that they've got a secret betting pool going. Ambassador Crix's assistant let it slip during this morning's orientation meeting." "A betting pool?" Jenny's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Against us? The odds are apparently quite good. The Arcturnians are offering 15 to 1 that we accidentally start at least 3 wars before breakfast." Before Jenny could respond, a tray clattered down next to us. "Did someone say impossible odds against humanity?" Marcus Wong, our resident risk assessment officer, dropped into the seat with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who hadn't just volunteered for disaster duty. "Marcus," I nodded, "I was just about to come find you. How do you feel about helping us organize the most boring event in galactic history?" "You mean, how do I feel about using my powers of risk assessment for evil?" He grinned. "I thought you'd never ask. Did you know I once wrote a 300-page report on the potential dangers of serving hot beverages at diplomatic functions?" "That was you?" Jenny's eyes widened. "That report got coffee banned from the Centaurian peace talks." "And prevented 3 assassination attempts," Marcus added proudly. "Turns out, a lot of species consider offering hot drinks a death threat. Who knew?" I pulled up the Council's guidelines on my tablet. "Well, you're going to love this. They've given us a list of 17,000 safety regulations to follow. My personal favorite is Regulation 5439. All anti-gravity buffets must account for species-specific gravitational preferences within a margin of error of 0.0001%. "That's actually impossible," Jenny noted, already pulling up calculation models on her own device. "The gravitational preferences would create conflicting fields that could theoretically turn the entire buffet into a black hole. Only if we use standard gravity generators," Marcus mused, that dangerous glint appearing in his eyes. "But if we followed the regulations exactly—" "No black holes," I said quickly, then paused, "unless they're purely decorative and properly contained." The orientation meeting that afternoon was everything I expected and worse. Cultural Officer Nipa had somehow managed to make their containment sphere even more purple with excitement. We've prepared a detailed presentation on proper event organization. They bubbled, their eye stalks wiggling in what I'd learned was their species' version of jazz hands. First, we'll cover the 57 approved methods of saying hello. 2 hours later, we'd made it through proper greetings, and were deep into what constituted appropriate small talk for species that experience time non-linearly. Remember, Nipa enthused, never ask a chronivore what they had for lunch, as they're simultaneously having every lunch they'll ever eat. Ambassador Crix's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been concern as they watched our team taking detailed notes. You seem unusually interested in the regulations, Cultural Integration Specialist Porter. Oh yes, I nodded earnestly. We want to make absolutely certain we follow every single rule perfectly. After all, what's the worst that could happen? The entire room went silent. 3 species simultaneously made their cultural gestures for warding off bad luck. Someone in the back actually fainted. Perhaps, Crick said slowly, their facets dulling with worry, we should move on to the section about proper emergency evacuation procedures. Excellent idea, I agreed cheerfully. Jenny, make sure you note down every single possible evacuation scenario. We wouldn't want to miss any of the 1,742 of them. Jenny's fingers flew across her tablet, already categorizing them by species, threat level and potential for accidental temporal displacement. Marcus raised his hand. Quick question about Regulation 12,458 regarding the proper placement of safety signs. It says they must be visible from all dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Does that include theoretical dimensions or just the commonly accessed ones? I watched with deep satisfaction as Crix's crystalline structure developed what appeared to be a stress fracture. After the meeting, Jenny cornered me in the hallway. They're setting us up to fail. Obviously, I agreed, but they've made one critical mistake. They gave us written instructions, Marcus chimed in, joining us with his arms full of regulation manuals. Exactly, I grinned. They told us to be boring, predictable, and to follow every rule to the letter, and we're going to do exactly that. Operation Malicious Compliance, Jenny suggested. Operation Malicious Compliance, I confirmed. Let's show them just how terrifyingly competent humans can be when we're told something's impossible. Marcus hugged his manuals closer. I'll start writing risk assessments for the risk assessments, and I'll begin calculating the optimal level of boring, Jenny added. Did you know there's actually a mathematical formula for predicting how long it takes someone to fall asleep during a presentation? As we headed back to our offices, I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for the council. They thought they were setting us up for failure, but they'd actually given us something far more dangerous than chaos. They'd given us permission to be perfect. 3 days into planning the most boring event in galactic history, our team had commandeered an entire floor of the embassy. The walls were covered in holographic charts, risk matrices, and what looked suspiciously like a conspiracy board connecting various safety regulations with string. Okay, Jenny announced, standing in front of our main planning screen. I've analyzed every cultural exchange event from the past 3 centuries. The average satisfaction rating is 67.3%. Our target is exactly 67.35%. Why that specific number? I asked, already dreading the answer. Because according to Regulation 8,445, any event scoring above 67.4% must be investigated for potential use of illegal entertainment enhancement substances. She grinned. And anything below 67.3% triggers an automatic cultural sensitivity audit? Marcus looked up from his stack of safety manuals, his eyes bloodshot from reading about proper spoon angles for gelatinous species. I've found something interesting about the seating arrangements. More interesting than the requirement for chairs to be simultaneously comfortable for species with and without physical forms, I asked. Much better, he replied. According to Regulation 9223, seating must be arranged to account for all known political, social, and quantum alignments of the attending species, And according to Regulation 9224, no attendee can be seated in a position that could be interpreted as hierarchically superior to another. Jenny's eyes lit up. But that's physically impossible. The dromedarians have to be seated above everyone else or they'll literally die. But the quantum collective exists in a state of perpetual superiority and inferiority. Exactly, Marcus said, looking far too pleased. The only way to satisfy both regulations is to create a seating arrangement that exists in a state of quantum uncertainty until observed. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Are you suggesting we turn the entire venue into a quantum probability field? It's the only way to be completely compliant with the regulations, he said innocently. And I suppose this has nothing to do with your doctoral thesis on quantum furniture dynamics? I'm just following the rules, Marcus replied, failing to hide his smirk. After all, what's the worst that could happen? 3 more delegates fainted in the hallway outside our office. Our planning sessions were regularly interrupted by NEPA, who seemed increasingly unnerved by our enthusiasm for regulatory compliance. Today they found us debating the proper temperature range for the event. The guidelines state that the venue must maintain optimal comfort levels for all attending species, they bubbled nervously, watching Jenny input calculations. Oh, we know, Jenny replied cheerfully. That's why we're designing a system of localized climate bubbles that will follow each delegate around. We're calling it Operation Goldilocks. Everything will be exactly right. But what about species that define comfort through discomfort? NEPA's eye stalks twisted in confusion. Already accounted for, Marcus chimed in. Their bubbles will maintain precisely calculated levels of optimal discomfort. We've cross-referenced all 17,000 comfort-related regulations. Did you know there's a specific subsection about maintaining appropriate levels of existential dread for species that experience anxiety as pleasure? NEPA's purple colouring took on a distinctly worried tinge. The betting pool, meanwhile, had taken on a life of its own. Our sources, the cafeteria staff who moonlighted as information brokers, reported that the odds had shifted dramatically. No one was quite sure what to make of humans actually following the rules. The Arcturnians have changed their bet, Jenny reported during our daily briefing. They're now offering 20-1 that will accidentally create a perfectly stable bureaucracy. That's ridiculous, Marcus scoffed. According to my calculations, if we follow all the regulations exactly, we'll create at least 3 perfectly stable bureaucracies and 1 minor religion dedicated to proper form-filling. I was about to respond when Ambassador Crix materialized in our office, their crystalline form vibrating with barely contained concern. Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, they chimed, hitting notes that made my teeth itch. The Council is impressed with your team's dedication to regulatory compliance. Just doing our best to follow the rules, I smiled. In fact, we've been studying the regulations so carefully, we found some fascinating interconnections. Did you know that if you follow all the safety protocols simultaneously, you technically create a perpetual motion machine? A small crack appeared in one of Crix's facets. But don't worry, I continued brightly. We've submitted all the proper paperwork for accidentally discovering a new law of physics, in triplicate, with the required quantum uncertainty margins. The Council has concerns, Crix managed, their voice hitting frequencies that made nearby windows resonate. Your approach seems completely within guidelines, Jenny suggested helpfully. Thoroughly risk-assessed, Marcus added. Predictable, I offered innocently. The crack in Crix's facet spread slightly. We've even prepared contingency plans for our contingency plans, I continued. For instance, in the event that our quantum seating arrangement achieves sentience, which, according to Regulation 15,766, has a non-zero probability, we've prepared the necessary forms to recognize it as a sovereign entity and include it in all future cultural exchange events. Crix's crystalline form emitted a high-pitched sound that made several devices in the room spontaneously recalibrate themselves. The event is in 2 weeks, they finally managed. Surely you can't have everything planned already. Oh, but we do, I smiled, pulling up our master schedule. Would you like to see our minute-by-minute breakdown of the entire event? We've accounted for every possible interaction, including 17 different types of awkward silence. Each one has been carefully categorized and risk-assessed for optimal discomfort levels. As crics fled our office, their crystal structure showing signs of what their species' medical professionals would later term acute regulatory stress disorder, I turned to my team. I think, I said thoughtfully, they're starting to realize their mistake. Which one? Jenny asked. Giving us written instructions or assuming humans can't weaponize boredom? Both, Marcus grinned, adding another red string to our conspiracy board. Definitely both. The morning of the intergalactic cultural exchange dawned bright and exactly 23.7 degrees Celsius, as mandated by Regulation 4892 for optimal sunrise appreciation across species. Our venue, the newly constructed Terran Diplomatic Center, gleamed with the kind of pristine perfection that made seasoned bureaucrats nervous. Status report, I commanded from our control center, surrounded by enough holographic displays to make a spaceship bridge look understocked. All quantum seating matrices are maintaining perfect uncertainty, Marcus reported. Every chair simultaneously exists and doesn't exist until someone tries to sit in it, at which point it becomes exactly the right type of furniture for their species. Environmental systems? I asked. Jenny's fingers danced across her control panel. Individual comfort bubbles are functioning at 99.9999% efficiency. The magmites are properly heated, the cryogenics are adequately chilled, and the gaseous collective is experiencing just the right amount of cosmic existential dread. The first delegates began arriving exactly on schedule. Their expressions, or various species-appropriate equivalents, shifted from diplomatic politeness to increasing confusion, as absolutely nothing went wrong. Ambassador Crix materialized beside me, their crystalline structure vibrating with suspicion. Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, this is unexpected. Is something wrong, Ambassador? I asked innocently. No, they admitted, sounding deeply troubled by this fact. Nothing is wrong. Everything is exactly right. It's unsettling. We're just following the regulations, I smiled. Oh, look, the quantum buffet is about to resolve itself into the exact configuration each observer expects to see. Across the room, delegates gasped as the buffet simultaneously became 17 different types of food service, each one perfectly aligned with individual cultural expectations. The chronivores were particularly pleased to find that their section existed at all points in time simultaneously. The quantum uncertainty field is functioning perfectly, Marcus reported proudly. Every species feels like they're in the most important position in the room, while simultaneously being aware that everyone else feels the same way. Nipa's containment sphere drifted over, their purple coloring shifting through worried shades of mauve. But where's the chaos? The confusion? The accidental diplomatic incidents? Oh, we have a thoroughly researched list of exactly when and where those are statistically most likely to occur, Jenny assured them, pulling up a chart. We've proactively prevented each one through careful application of Regulation 7392 through 12,445. You prevented the accidents? Nipa's eye stalks drooped. But the betting pool is experiencing some interesting fluctuations, I noted, glancing at the latest odds being discreetly displayed on my neural link. Apparently the Arcturnians are now offering 50 to 1 on us, accidentally achieving perfect bureaucratic harmony. The event continued with horrifying smoothness. Delegates found themselves engaging in perfectly acceptable small talk, guided by our subtle atmospheric adjustments and carefully calculated conversation matrices. Every possible faux pas was prevented before it could occur through our predictive algorithm, which Marcus had dubbed the party pooper. The Zarblaxians just attempted an unauthorized interpretive dance, Jenny reported. Environmental systems automatically adjusted the local gravity to make the movements appear completely appropriate for formal diplomatic occasions. The quantum collective is expressing distress about feeling too certain about their position in space-time, Marcus added. Increase the existential uncertainty field by 7%, I ordered. But make sure it remains within regulatory limits for metaphysical comfort. Ambassador Crix hadn't moved from their spot beside me for 20 minutes, their crystalline structure developing what appeared to be stress patterns. This isn't natural, they finally said. Humans don't do perfect. I believe you'll find that according to Regulation 15,987, perfection is defined as the state of being exactly adequate while maintaining appropriate levels of imperfection to ensure comfort for species that experience distress at flawlessness, I quoted. We're simply maintaining optimal levels of controlled imperfection. A small crack appeared in one of Crix's lower facets. Would you like to see our documentation? I offered helpfully. We've prepared reports on our reports, including a fascinating analysis of how the analysis of our analysis creates a recursive loop of perfect bureaucratic efficiency. The crack spread. We've even submitted the proper forms for accidentally discovering that the universe might be powered by paperwork, Marcus added cheerfully. The required impact assessment for that revelation should be processed sometime in the next 5 to 7 eternities. Across the room, a group of delegates had gathered around the quantum buffet, watching in horrified fascination as it maintained perfect compliance with 17,000 contradictory regulations simultaneously. Is the food supposed to exist in a state of quantum satisfaction? One of them asked nervously. According to Regulation 13,556, all refreshments must maintain optimal levels of existence uncertainty to accommodate species with varying definitions of matter, Jenny explained helpfully. Would you like to see our 70-page report on the philosophical implications of quantum appetizers? The delegate fled, joining a growing group of officials huddled in the corner, watching the perfectly orchestrated event with increasing paranoia. They're waiting for something to go wrong, Marcus observed. That's the beauty of it, I smiled. Nothing will go wrong because we've planned for everything to go exactly right, and somehow that's even more terrifying. Little did they know this was just Phase 1 of Operation Malicious Compliance. The real fun would begin when they realized that perfect execution of their regulations had some rather interesting side effects. It started with the bureaucratic collective. They were the first to notice that our perfect compliance with regulations had created what they termed a cascade of competence. 3 of their observers had to be escorted out when they began spontaneously generating new forms to document the unprecedented efficiency. Sir, Jenny reported, trying to hide her grin, the collective is requesting copies of our organizational matrices. Apparently they've never seen such perfectly optimized tedium before. Send them the documents, I nodded. All 17,000 versions cross-referenced with quantum uncertainty margins. Marcus looked up from his monitoring station. You realize what this means, right? We've weaponized boredom so effectively that it's becoming exciting. He was right. Across the venue, delegates were becoming increasingly animated about how smoothly everything was running. The betting pool had transformed into a complex mathematical model, trying to predict just how perfect things could get before the universe objected. Ambassador Crix materialized next to our control station again, their crystalline structure now showing multiple stress fractures. Cultural Integration Specialist Porter, we need to discuss what's happening. Is something wrong, Ambassador? I asked innocently. All systems are functioning within specified parameters. Would you like to see the reports? We have them in triplicate with additional copies existing in quantum superposition just in case. That's exactly the problem. Crix's voice hit a frequency that made nearby quantum uncertainties temporarily collapse into certainties. You've somehow turned perfect compliance into a form of chaos. Oh, that, I nodded. Yes, we have documentation for that too. According to our analysis, when you follow all regulations simultaneously, you create what we're calling a bureaucratic singularity, a point of such perfect order that it naturally generates its own form of chaos. The Arcturnians are starting a religion, Jenny reported cheerfully. They're calling it the Church of Optimal Organization. Their first holy text is our event planning spreadsheet. The Quantum Collective is requesting asylum, Marcus added. They say we're the first species to truly understand their simultaneous need for structure and uncertainty. Nipa's containment sphere had turned an interesting shade of puce. But this isn't how humans are supposed to behave. You're supposed to be unpredictable. Oh, we are, I assured them. We're being unpredictably predictable. It's a whole new form of chaos. We've already filed the proper paperwork to have it classified as a novel form of entropy. The chaos cascade was spreading. The chronivores, impressed by our temporal management protocols, were offering to share their secrets of time manipulation, but only if we agreed to help them optimize their scheduling system. The Hive Mind Collective had splintered into 17 perfectly organized subcommittees, each dedicated to studying a different aspect of our organizational methodology. Sir, Jenny interrupted, her voice urgent. The bureaucratic collective, they're trying to adopt our systems, all of them, simultaneously. On the main screen, we watched as the notoriously rigid species attempted to implement human-style perfect compliance. The result was something like watching an origami master have an existential crisis. Should we stop them? Marcus asked, already calculating the risks. According to Regulation 14,776, I quoted, all cultural exchange participants must be allowed to freely adopt beneficial organizational methodologies, provided proper forms are filed in advance. But sir, Jenny grinned, we filed those forms last week. All 17,000 variations of them, Marcus added, including one that technically won't exist until next Tuesday. Ambassador Crix's crystal structure was now emanating a high-pitched whine. You planned this. Somehow you planned even this. Of course not, Ambassador, I said soothingly. We simply followed all the regulations perfectly. How could anyone have predicted that combining 17,000 contradictory rules would create a new form of organizational theory that's simultaneously perfect and chaotic? The betting pool has collapsed, Jenny reported. It's achieved quantum uncertainty about whether it exists or not. The Temporal Logistics Department is requesting our help, Marcus added. Apparently, our event planning is so efficient, it's affecting causality. Across the room, a group of delegates had started what appeared to be a spontaneous seminar on the philosophical implications of perfectly organized chaos. 3 species that had been at war for centuries were now united in their attempt to understand how humans had turned bureaucracy into an art form. We're getting requests, Jenny announced, her screens filling with messages, from every major civilization. They all want our organizational protocols. Send them everything, I nodded. Every form, every protocol, every quantum uncertain procedure. After all, according to Regulation 16,892, we're required to share any breakthrough in administrative methodologies. Even if that breakthrough technically qualifies as a mimetic hazard? Marcus asked. Especially then, I grinned. Make sure to include all the appropriate warning labels. In triplicate. Ambassador Crix's crystalline structure had developed so many stress patterns, it was starting to refract light in entirely new wavelengths. The Council will need to discuss this. Of course, I agreed. We've already prepared the meeting room. The quantum seating arrangement is primed for optimal discussion efficiency, and we've calculated the exact level of existential uncertainty needed for productive debate. As Crix fled, leaving behind a trail of crystalline dust, I turned to my team. I think, I said thoughtfully, they're finally beginning to understand. Understand what? Nipa's eye stalks quivered. That giving humans written instructions and expecting us to fail, I smiled, is the worst thing that could happen to the instructions. The Galactic Council's emergency session was held 3 days after what was now being called the Incident of Perfect Compliance. The chamber looked different, partly because of the quantum uncertainty fields that had somehow become permanent fixtures, and partly because 3/4 of the council members were still trying to process what had happened. I stood at my platform, which had mysteriously relocated itself to a position that was simultaneously at the bottom and the top of the chamber. Jenny and Marcus flanked me, both trying not to look too pleased with themselves. Ambassador Crix, their crystalline form now permanently displaying what their medical staff called regulatory stress patterns, addressed the assembly. We are here to discuss the unexpected outcomes of the recent intergalactic cultural exchange. Point of order, called out a representative from the bureaucratic collective, now reformed as the optimized collective for maximum efficiency. According to the new protocols we've adopted from the humans, this meeting requires 17 different types of documentation, including 3 that haven't been invented yet. We've already filed those, Jenny announced helpfully, including the ones that don't exist yet. We have receipts in quantum superposition. Crix's crystal structure emitted a sound like a chandelier having an existential crisis. That is precisely what we need to discuss. Humanity has somehow turned regulatory compliance into a weapon of mass reconstruction. I object to that characterization, I said calmly. We simply followed your instructions perfectly, repeatedly, with backup copies. The Arcturnian Church of Optimal Organization has already gained 6 million converts, Marcus added helpfully. Their holy scripture is our event planning guide. Apparently the quantum seating chart makes an excellent meditation aid. Nipa's containment sphere had graduated to a shade of purple previously unknown to physics. But the forms, the regulations, they weren't supposed to be actually possible to follow. Ah, I smiled. You should have specified that in writing, preferably in triplicate, with appropriate uncertainty margins. The council chamber erupted into what could only be described as organized chaos. Species that had never agreed on anything were united in their bewilderment at how humanity had turned their own bureaucracy against them. "Order!" Crix chimed desperately. "We must maintain order." According to Regulation 15,999, Jenny quoted, "Order must be maintained in a state of quantum uncertainty to accommodate species that experience time non-linearly. Would you like to see our 70-page analysis of what constitutes order in a multidimensional probability space?" 3 more council members developed stress patterns. "The council," Crix managed, their voice hitting frequencies that made abstract concepts vibrate, "has come to a decision. Earth is hereby granted full membership status, effective immediately." "We've already accepted," I nodded. "The paperwork was filed last week, and next week, and in several theoretical timelines." Additionally, Crix continued, their crystal structure creaking ominously, new regulations are being implemented across council space. The phrase, "what's the worst that could happen?" is now classified as a Class 3 mimetic hazard when spoken in the presence of humans. "We've prepared compliance documentation for that as well," Marcus grinned, "including risk assessments for the risk assessments of classifying the phrase as a hazard." The council chamber had begun to develop its own organizational system, inspired by our event's quantum uncertainty principles. Platforms shifted between positions based on the logical weight of arguments, creating what the quantum collective described as a perfect democracy of bureaucratic chaos. "There's just one more thing," I added, pulling up a final set of documents. "We've taken the liberty of optimizing the entire council regulatory system, all 17,000 volumes of it." The horror in the room was palpable. "Don't worry," Jenny assured them. "We've made it much more efficient. Now it's only 16,999 volumes, but they exist in a state of quantum superposition that makes them simultaneously more and less complicated than before. The new system is already being implemented," Marcus announced. "The paperwork for implementing the paperwork has already filed itself, in triplicate, across 7 dimensions." Ambassador Crix's crystalline form had developed so many stress patterns that they were technically qualifying as a new form of art in 3 different cultures. "And the best part?" I smiled. "It's all exactly according to regulations, every single one of them, simultaneously." The aftermath of our perfect compliance rippled across the galaxy. the bureaucratic collective evolved into a hybrid system of precise chaos, maintaining order through carefully calculated uncertainty. The quantum collective found peace in the paradox of organized unpredictability. Even the chronovores adapted, creating temporal filing systems that existed at all points in time simultaneously. As for humanity, we gained a reputation, not as the chaos bringers they expected, but as something far more terrifying. Bureaucrats who actually read the fine print. These days, whenever someone in council space suggests giving humans written instructions, they're quietly reminded of the incident of perfect compliance. The betting pools have never quite recovered, and there's a standing regulation requiring all human organized events to include at least 3 minor disasters, just to maintain everyone's peace of mind. But perhaps the most lasting effect was the introduction of a new warning label, now required on all regulatory documents across the galaxy. Caution: contents may be weaponized by humans through exact compliance. For your own safety, please maintain appropriate levels of vagueness in all instructions. After all, in a universe of infinite possibilities, the worst thing that could happen isn't chaos. It's humans with a rulebook and something to prove.